Warm welcome to the Gothenburg Global Biodiversity Center, to our annual biodiversity lecture. So nice to see so many people here, but also warm welcome to you that are here online. Now, those online didn't hear. My name is Jenny Klingberg, and I'm the director of the Gothenburg the Gothenburg Global Biodiversity Center. And here we have
Marie Stensegger. I'm the chair of the steering group for the Gothenburg Global Biodiversity.
I would like to also say a few words about the Gothenburg Global Biodiversity Center before we start. It is a collaboration with so many different partners working with biodiversity in some way. We hosted at the Department of Biological and Environmental Sciences here at the University of Gothenburg. But in total, we are 18 different partners that work with, together we represent both research, outreach, education, scientific collections, and conservation work, everything for biodiversity. The aim is to link science and society around biodiversity and to enhance and accelerate the research around biodiversity. I would also like to thank our funders, especially BEC, the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services in a Changing Climate Strategic Research Area, that is supporting this specific event. Also the Faculty of Science at the University, that is, and the Region Västra Götaland, that is funding us, but of course also all our partners.
Thank you, and it is my honor to introduce the speaker for this annual lecture, Brigitte Baptiste, Rectora of the University of Iran. It's a business school focusing on sustainable entrepreneurship, but Brigitte is also an internationally recognized, well-recognized ecologist. And since I'm also coming from the faculty of the business school here at the University of Gothenburg, it's kind of very special to introduce you this way. Brigitte have a very impressive CV, so I won't read that out now, but I will give a presentation, a personal touch then instead, to pick those pieces that I've been interacting with Brigitte about. We met first time in 2015 when we both were elected as part of the multidisciplinary expert of the Intergovernmental Social Science Policy Platform of Biodiversity Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Brigitte was then the director of the famous Humboldt Institute in Bogota. Well experiences those kinds of, in the context of international negotiations and agreements on biodiversity. I was very much a rookie, but good to have people that knew what this was all about then when we started. And the task of those 25 people from all over the world was to oversee the work on this biodiversity platform that was, if you don't know about it, the baby sister of IPCC, but focusing on biodiversity. Brigitte has a unique expertise in indigenous people and biodiversity, and in IPBES, she had a certain responsibility to take care of these matters on indigenous and local knowledge, but also indigenous peoples and local communities, and their kind of how they were embraced into IPBES work. It is certainly an important aspect that IPBES is working with. In IPBES, there's, I hope you've seen some of the assessments, and in Medellin, one of the big plenaries where the assessments are approved, that they in Medellin in Colombia in 2018, it was kind of a huge session because there was as much as 5 assessments approved by that time. Most of us we ate and slept when there was some time to it. But Brigitte is also a national celebrity, so she gave TV shows in between the sessions. Very impressive. I don't know where you found the energy. I didn't have any, but yeah, we understood the importance for you also in ecological terms then for the country as a whole. My time then in IPBES continued. Brigitte was one of the co-chairs for the values assessment that came, it's almost 2 years ago, a quite important assessment that addresses how do we value nature and how do we bridge between various kinds of valuing and how do we find ways to take care of what cannot be measured easily in medical terms. And that assessment that Brigitte certainly played a key role in is also now making good imprints in the global biodiversity framework that was accepted in Montreal, as you might know, in December 2022. I want to end with that one crucially important contribution from Brigitte to science is shedding light on what nature is and challenging traditional ways and kind of uninformed ways of talking about what is natural and not. And that also gives important lessons to all of us about what it is to be human. So that's also a field that you've been working a lot with and you really should have a lot of credit for. Enough for me. I hope you're as excited me now to welcome Brigitte Baptiste on the floor, please.
Well, good afternoon, almost evening. Thank you very much for your kind words and the invitation here. I'm afraid that after such a wonderful introduction, I won't be able to deliver the what you were expecting, but well, thank you again for being also on Friday. I know that you want to go away to drink and dance perhaps, but I will be with you, so bear in mind that I really care for that. The first time I went to Scandinavian country was in Trondheim in Norway. I was invited to prepare about material for consideration of the Convention of Biological Diversity related to indigenous knowledge. That's not because of particularly doing research in that field, but because as a Humboldt director, I have access to kind of the discussion about the many kinds or types of environments and types of knowledge that were produced by the local people, also by peasants, also by African Americans and all sorts of people in Colombia. So every country has plenty of cultural diversity, and there's this struggle to raise the hand and say, hey, I'm here, I have a valuable piece of knowledge, I have rights, I think differently than the government or than the society, the mainstream society. And so that was kind of the origin of my link then to IBES and to the task force of ILK, which is indigenous and local knowledge. We don't talk about traditional knowledge, but it's a piece of that, quite important. And then after this kind of a long story, I ended in the values assessment, which is the short name from IBES, discussing with 60, 70 scholars from all around the world the question of are we giving enough importance to biodiversity and ecosystem services? If that's the case, why is it still disappearing? Why deforestation? Why pollution? Why invasive species? So there has to be something really a mismatched between the way we think about life and how do we behave. And that discussion is, I think, the central piece of this presentation. And hopefully we have time to discuss a bit on your views about value production and the relation of values and behavior, because that's where things become muddy in all the discussions. I think that I'm a good person, but when I go out, I just kick the kids and they do very bad things. So no, I don't, but it's very different what you say than what you do. And that's a particular concerning issue. And that's why I titled this presentation, Emerging Traditional Invisible Values, the quest to become aware. We may be aware of many things, but are we doing things related to that? First, think a bit of what it means to be aware. And this great news coming from New York last week that some neuroscientists declare that insects are self-aware. So, and it's a chunk of really, really important people saying that they have found that many other animals, invertebrates, but even teeny insects have some sense of themselves. And that changes everything in terms of if I want to kill the cockroach, you have to think twice that you are killing a self-aware being. That you don't know how to handle this kind of discovery, but still you need to be aware of others, persons, and non-human awareness because you interact all the time with them, and you need to define what are you gonna do in certain circumstance. And there's a history about a story, about a guy in Vancouver that was driving in a highway and saw a baby moose that was being chased by a bear. And he, as the title of the news says, he saved the moose from being hunted or chased or eaten by the bear. And so he stopped the car, went out, took the baby moose, put it in the trunk, and go away to his house. As a result, the bear went there or his home and perhaps told the cops, sorry, an alien came and stole my food. You'll be hungry for today at least. And the man was fired because he went against the policies of the company that he was working with for breaking wildlife protocols. So both them, the man and the moose, suddenly were kicked out of this world. They changed their participation in this world for other dimension, kind of that. They transmigrate. I don't know what happened after that, but I'm sure that he went to many TV shows to get interviewed, there was news. The baby moose probably was adopted by a zoo, but life changed, like in many movies. Suddenly things changed, which happens, and you all perhaps have experienced certain moments where this happens. Particularly with animals, I mean, or with biodiversity, that there's certain experience you had in terms of interspecific relationships. Then last year, Marta Nussbaum just published his book about justice for animals, where she says that, well, we know, nature is not just. Why should the bears need to eat baby moose? And I remember my mother always getting away from the TV place at home when I put this Discovery Channel with the lions chasing the oryxes or whatever, they eat everything. I say, no, I don't want to see how the lions kill small animals. That's unfair. I said, well, Mama, it's nature. I say, I don't care. It's unfair. And then I got Marta Nussbaum's saying my mother was right. She's a kind of philosopher. But I say, well, we are natural born killers, as the movie says. So natural is that way also for humans. We behave naturally because we also can do all this different stuff. But then you start thinking if this notion of nature should be the one we care about. If we understand other species' nature, why don't we apply or we don't think the same about ourselves? So this question about applying human values to animals or trying to get information about animal values for us to become more natural, it's a complex thing. So there's plenty of contradictions that emerge from this relationship. And those contradictions are being used politically. Those contradictions appear on the discussions about wildlife management, about land use planning, about economics, about natural resource use. So all the time we have discussions and contradictions about which value on how important is something for you and not for you. And it's a very basic difference between humans and between societies and between cultures and between persons. So the question is how to balance those contradictory values and try to understand why there are certain people that favors some certain values or behaves according to certain values and other people does not. This is an example that is on the social networks those days, which is the Seaspiracy, which is like the Cowspiracy documentary, where this is an organization that provides a very compelling video on how fisheries, global fisheries, are destroying the sea. That's plenty of information, plenty of data, images, and things. But then you get horrified by that and you say, I will never eat again a fish. But then there's lots of science organizations that look at the video and say, well, let's look at the numbers, let's look at what they say. And they find lots of inaccuracies, lots of lies, lots of arguments that were not backed by facts. And so they published against Seaspiracy saying, okay, it's fair to be worried about the seas and the fisheries and what's happening, but perhaps it's not proper to forge things, even if it's in defense of the fish or life. So there's a huge discussion about that, because the reason to try to defend the sea's health, it's absolutely relevant and important I think for everybody. But then the way they did it perhaps was not that nice. So there's plenty of issues similar to that one, and I won't say anything about who is doing well or not. But the issue is, how do we tailor those debates that are value-based? How do you see which is the way to go forward? Because many decisions nowadays are being taken without science or without knowledge. And then you ask, well, this is your science. You have values as persons, and you have biased because you know or you think you know. There's a more complex thing. You need to go a bit back to epistemology, to philosophy, and say, but this is a statistical reality. This is a model. This is what it's yours. And then there's always the example of the indigenous knowledge. This knowledge has worked well in the Amazon for 3,000, 5,000 years, and they don't think in the same way than you. So they don't need statistics, they don't do models, and they don't even write. So perhaps they know better the Amazon than you or us. I mean, and complexity, we still are struggling with the complexity of biodiversity in the rainforest, and they don't. They really are thriving well. So there's plenty again of differences in terms of whose knowledge has to be applied and whose values also has to be taken into account when making decisions. But since this is a political discussion as well, you can also forge many ideas about nature. This is natural. You have to behave this way. You have to behave the other. Then at the end, what we have is kind of a mess of marketing ideas or marketed ideas. Everybody's struggling to be heard and saying, I have proof that mining companies are doing this. Then the mining companies say, I have proof that you have been paid by other company to undermine my capacities. And it's quite difficult to know what's happening. And you know, the the largest risk that this year the World Economic Forum has identified for the world's economy is fake news. Lies everywhere. So, well, how are we going to get rid of denial, to get rid of greenwashing, to get rid of politicians being very, very nice to biodiversity, but then doing otherwise? So we need to kind of create a process to really see how to get an agreement about what have to be done. And then, I won't, unfortunately, today being able to talk a bit queer views of nature, but a bit of queer and cyborg approach, because what is happening is that we are changing the world very fast, very quickly, and everything is becoming different, and we are losing track of change. But we know that we need to change, but we don't know where to go. So it's quite a challenge for science. And I put this in yellow, the issue of power. At the end, we still are struggling to understand or to use power to make what we wish to. So it's a big issue behind everything. I have the power to decide. I have the power to consume. I have the power to protect. And that's why there's lots of discussions about that, and why the IPBES and the countries that got this assessment on values were so, we'll say, so pricky about the wording and about what we said about values. Because, you know, there's quite different regimes, political regimes around the world, and countries that have some values, some religious values, for example. Then are other countries that have market values ruling. There are other countries that have other types of ideologies of government models and ethical politics. So you cannot go in the middle of United Nations and say, well, religious values are useless. Then everything will be destroyed. So balancing narratives is quite important. So getting to agreements with indigenous views of the world, with other type of people, such nasty people that does business and lives in corporations and they destroy the world, or politicians that are corrupt. So you have plenty of stereotypes, plenty of narratives, different narratives that apparently are backed by some type of values, greed or ingenuity or solidarity or faith. So I want to go into value system, but just to make you aware that how difficult it is to really get to the basis of difference and to accept that there's no way to translate things from one system to the other. A value is a value, but values are conveyed, are expressed in different ways. So then you can do research, and psychology does lots of research about value formation and value use. You have lots of symbolic values, things that you think happen in the world and you frame from your emotions, from your beliefs, and are absolutely fundamental for you, such as faith. If you think that there's an afterlife world, and afterlife hell or heaven or thing, you change your behavior accordingly. So this is important. But there are some also there's ways to behave following empiric information. So there's no hell, no heaven, at least that we know from a scientific basis. Hell is here. We are hell for the others, and or heaven. But in fact, we don't know what's going to happen after life. So we have to talk with those guys that believe in afterlife and get an agreement on what to do in this particular level of complexity. And then you have language and you have behavior. So those are the 4 dimensions of value formation that has to be taken into account when trying to get agreements about what should we do in terms of biodiversity. For example, we get some aesthetical sensibility nowadays with consumption of meat. We don't want to kill animals and eat them. Well, some of us prefer to kill fish. They are not as smart as a goat or as a larger animal, so we don't want to hunt, but we may fish. Well, there's people that prefers not to eat red meat, but go to chicken or then go to fish, and they abandon that and go to invertebrates, and finally they go vegetarian and they go vegan, and that's kind of a chain of values acting on your preferences. But then this aesthetical sensibility is really reflected on market preferences. And there's lots of interest into telling people what to eat or what not to eat. And the graphs show how the market of vegetarian protein is growing, and is one of the fastest growing businesses in the world. And many, many countries such as Brazil, Canada, and even Colombia and Argentina are thinking on shifting their production of meat or to producing plant-based proteins using soy, using lentils, using beans and things, because that's the trend. So it's good to have a value in terms of your preference and diet, but is your value? Are you sure that you are following your instinct? You're following your are you own your decision, or is somebody just letting you know that it's bad to eat animals, it's bad to kill animals, go veggie, at some subtle messages? So it's the results of propaganda. I'm sure that with vegetarians it's not the case generally, but with almost everything else it is. There's lots of voices around us telling what to do. And in fact, we don't take enough time to check, to double check if this is something real. And since it's so entangled in our emotions, it's very difficult to challenge. So behavior, you know how difficult it is to change behavior. I eat too much, and I know that I should not eat that much, but how do I behave? How do I change my behavior? And this is kind of the big quests that here it's recommended that you change your behavior. You try to do different things that perhaps are quite important for some, but not for everybody. And the other graph is just what scientists say about another related issue with the seaspiracy. There was in 2006, there was a paper publishing that the seas will become empty if we keep fishing at the same rate and speed at that time. And they published the model. It was science, and then by there was the trends with dots, the real trends, and then some scientists look the way the mathematical model was carried on or designed, and found that there was really lots of mistakes, and the stocks, the fish stocks, are not collapsing. So you've been told all the time that the fish stocks are collapsing, and some are collapsing, but some are recovering. And there's a very complex population dynamics and fisheries policy coming in and out, and behaviors. So the problem of eating fish or fisheries, sustainable fisheries, is not solved yet. And the only thing that I can say is beware with what you hear. But if we have to read every label, and we have to take to measure calories and to measure our footprint every day on everything, it's tiresome. It's very difficult to do that. So we trust in messages sent by friends, sent by the media, sent by who knows. No, there's again, many voices going around for you to change your values. So IPBES, what we did with those guys, it was a kind of a summary of the ways we use to measure the importance of biodiversity. And I invite you to download at least the summary for policymakers. It's a very short summary with 30-something findings, no recommendations. IPBES never is prescriptive, so you can think what you wish about the findings, and there's a chain of data attached to support the finding. There's many findings that are strongly supported. There's some findings that are some evidence, and there are others that are totally a puzzle. It's something that has to be solved in the future. But the most important conclusion of the values assessment was this, that is on screen, that even if there are hundreds or less than hundreds, I would say dozens of methods to really measure the importance that we give to biodiversity. Usually studies only measure market value or things that can be paid or can be represented with money. And so obviously the recommendation would be to within the spectrum of valuation methods and not to stay just with money. The most cynical say, if it is not valued with money, it doesn't exist. You need to value things with money. But that's not the case in many societies. We know that there are lots of different ways of valuing biodiversity and ecosystem services. So the assessment also frame the amount or the approaches that different cultures have to value formation or to valuing biodiversity and ecosystem services. And then there's this graphic about values typology, which is, well, values belong to a world view, a particular way of seeing the world. Then there are some values that are embedded in this world view, and then go until your particular daily life when you express or you do things that are coherent with this world view. And then there's lots of jumps from one level to the next, because you may think that the biodiversity is very valuable because it supports happiness. But then in your daily life, you don't care a bit about other living beings. So there's a dissonance that perhaps is part of the basis of why biodiversity is not really becoming important enough for your daily life. If you, and again, with the example with an insect, if you have spiders at home and then you love biodiversity, but then you kill the spider every time you see it. So how do we relate with other species is kind of the question. I'm going to look at the timing. Okay, very slow. So behind that, it's a big issue, which is your world understanding of nature, of what is nature, because depending on what you think is nature, you will change your way you behave in the world. If you think nature is something apart from you, that you go on Sundays and walk and enjoy, and then the rest of the week you spend out of nature, that's something different than thinking that you are a natural thing or body that has evolved and is a product of nature, and now are able to give lectures here in Gothenburg after a trip of 12 hours in a plane. So that's the most unnatural thing for some, but to me is the most natural thing to do, because I'm natural, because I come from evolution. So there's lots of discussion about that, and even IPBES is a bit trapped on that, because nature and the world is very appealing. It's so easy to use nature as something to do things with, or to avoid doing things with, that we really think on calling all the good things under the name of nature. This is natural. It's natural food. This is natural clothing. This is natural behavior. And then this is a picture of a very natural issue here. There's a flower behind the scene where there's a spider hiding, which will or is hunting or trapping a bee that approach the flower. But at the moment that the spider catches the bee, there's some teeny flies, which are called the dirty flies, that suck the blood of the bee that is dying. While the bee is dying, they perform. What a nasty guys! They're really disgusting. They're just small and just for a movie. But then, who is really behind everything? Well, it's the flower, because the flower uses this dynamic to become pollinated. The flower needs the dirty flies to come and get a bit of pollen while the drama is being performed. But none of them really have agency. Of course, you can identify who's the flower, who's the spider, who's the bee, and who's the fly in the market economy, or in the society, or in family. Now, let's not talk about that because it will bring some trouble. But there's lots of subjectivity in judging animal behavior, how animals do good or not. And then if they are parasites, they are bad. So this is an example. You never have to be a parasite. When we know there's plenty of parasites among our society, but they're good parasites, or good symbionts. There's plenty of different behaviors around, and that's why we think now that we were able to overcome those biological essential relationships that have been evolving for millions of years, thousands of millions of years, because we have culture. And culture is the way we get rid of the nasty behaviors such as the small flies. We don't think that behaving like those small flies is correct. We shouldn't be doing that, or at least publicly, or at least in institutions. There's no metaphor to really say, well, sometimes we may do this. It's a good example for a nature-based solution. That can be. Then suddenly we can find that the behavior of those flies can inspire a particular way of production, or can inspire particular technology, and why not? So what I mean by this, and I'm finishing this kind of first section, and we'll 10 minutes more for going to the cyberscape ecology, is that we really are cultural animals that are different from all other species, but we still are natural, and we use culture for our well-being and to take care of the rest of the living beings, and we, through that, define what is natural. So this is kind of a contradiction or a paradox all the time. We are cultural, defining nature, but nature is part of culture, and so it's an endless loop. But that's important. If we are nature and we define nature, we may do many things with our capacities. We may really engage into better management. So what needs to be done? There's a paper that is being published by Patti Balvanera and Unai Pascual and some other experts from the values assessment, asking the question, are there some sustainability aligned values? Are there some values that should be upheld or should be taught in terms of building sustainability, such as humility, to being humble, for example? This is something important for sustainability, or not so much, but perhaps solidarity, or perhaps I don't know. I'm running short of sustainable values. Why is that? No, okay, that's because it's not easy. It's not easy because it depends on how do you define nature, how do you define yourself within your definition, how do you define the correct behavior you have to do, and then what do you do? So it's a complex chain of things that you have to really get into account. And you also get exposed to question, to challenge, to criticism. Say, why are you doing this? And all the time, there's people asking you, are you eating raw meat? Why are you doing this? Are you using this kind of clothes? Are you helping this congressperson for a law in that sense or the other? Which is nice, which is science works that way, always by criticism. And you have to solve it. You have to defend yourself. And with values, it happens the same. We are facing kind of a new age of cultural negotiation, intercultural negotiation, to not to translate my beliefs into your behavior or your beliefs into my behavior, but to get an agreement, like when you get married. When you got married, you have to get into terms with your partner, and you live together without trying to change the other. When you do, lots of pressure to try to change your partner. Partner says, stop. You love me, or you want me to become you. And that's one of the most frequent reasons to divorce. So that happens also at the larger scale. Countries have to negotiate, indigenous peoples have to negotiate, but what are the terms of those negotiations? There's asymmetries, lots of power asymmetries, plenty of different conditions for that negotiation. And that's perhaps one of the critical issues in terms of the global agreements on biodiversity. The COP, that's, as Mary mentioned, the Biodiversity COP16 is going to be in Colombia. And Colombia is one of the most asymmetric countries in terms of welfare, well-being in the world. And one of the hopes is that the COP will serve as a way to call attention upon that there's no way to really protect biodiversity while 30% of the population is under the level of poverty and is hungry. So that's kind of the things that need to be negotiated. And then also we perhaps need to do better in terms of education and to defend critical thinking against indoctrination. And because values usually are seen as the way a culture keeps flowing to the future. You need to train your children to keep tradition. And this is quite a complex thing, because there's societies that are more conservative in that way, in that sense, that they teach certain truths, and there are societies who educate in critical thinking. So you teach your children to question yourself, and that's a trouble. Of course, I have two girls, and I try to not teach them to be critical, but they don't behave, they didn't learn, so I'm lost. And the issue of decolonialism. Who has transferred values to another society through decades, or using different types of mechanisms to force a particular view of the world. And here in Europe, we are trying to think on how to decolonialize, or how to understand our past as colonizers. But that happens all the time in every country, not just with European experience. The Incas were quite an empire that became colonial in South America a couple of centuries before the Spanish arrived. The Aztecs were also quite a colonizer power, and they were not nice as well. Of course, nowadays you cannot remind that. It's not politically correct to say that imperial ideas are not just white behaviors, but history is full of imperialism. The issue of nature is also plaguing the language of ecosystem services. There's the discussion of you speak about ecosystem services or nature's contributions to people. That has taken years and a huge amount of meetings and people discussing, and IPBES at least decided to speak about nature's contributions to people because ecosystem services was too linked to utilitarian values. But then the question, really, nature does really or contributes to human well-being? Nature does anything? Or nature, even if nature exists outside, we have to negotiate, we extend our hands and get food from nature. It's, and you are seeing by my expression that I really prefer ecosystem services, even if it's utilitarian. I don't think nature, if it exists out of us, gives us anything. You have to work. You have to at least to collect, to walk around, to do something. And time, perhaps 5 minutes more. Okay. So what kind of values can we build together and share to help rebuild the world, to help put some pieces again in their places? And especially because, well, you know, all these scenarios, I won't go through them. But when human population is crashing, not just in Europe, demography is becoming a problem, but it's everywhere. Even under, quote unquote, underdeveloped countries are having trouble with keeping up with their populations. Colombia has 50 million people. It will grow until 58, and then it will start again to go back because we already have crossed the demographical replacement rate. So every country in the world, but Nigeria and Indonesia, are really having trouble in the next few years to have a workforce. There's very little young people coming for the next decades, and they'll have to do what we have not done. They will have to rebuild the world in the middle of climatic crisis. So it's going to be a hard job for kids. I'm looking at one, but we are giving her lots of strength and vitamins and technology and her capacities to do what needs to be done. I want to go this with perhaps almost finishing here. We have produced an amazing and awful amount of changes in the world, willingly or not, and we ended as we are here today. We are aware of the risks that we are facing. We are trying to change society by inviting everybody to change behavior, to change the way they do things. But people is reluctant to change, or they don't know how to change, or they don't trust the messages that they are getting in terms of what has to be done, or how do I help? And when you tell them you have to help this way or not. But that's just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that people, we as a species, also have changed immensely. We live twice the lives of the previous generations. We have health conditions that were never available for in the past thousands of years. We have a huge material capacities for doing things. We can fly to the moon. I don't know if it is good or not, but we have that capacity at least. and we have antibiotics, and we have many important things for well-being. And we can change our bodies nowadays. We have done that for many years as well. We can train ourselves, but we're getting full of wearables. So we can figure also how the planet will change in the future, and how our bodies will change in the future, and how our conversations with non-human beings will change in the future. So Mother Earth, this is my version of Mother Earth, may help us, of course. She has lots of nice things to propose in terms of values and behavior. There's many other models of to value or to address change, but perhaps the most important thing I will recommend many authors is forget about nature. Don't speak about nature, because there's nothing really interesting in this world. It's too complicated. It brings us trouble all the time. And if you're gonna use each time you use it, you have to define, to say what are you thinking is laying behind. Because if not, you will be choosing tons of values without really mentioning them. You are conveying an idea of nature that perhaps is not shared by anybody. Nature is good, nature is wise, nature is sufficient, nature is whatever, and then it doesn't match with local realities, doesn't match with social realities, doesn't match with mindsets. So don't do that. And I will jump to the last image. I had a little more material, but don't. So body changes and technology use, and that's why I spoke at the beginning about cyber ecology, that we have been able now to create a new level of complexity in the world, which is the metaverse. And this metaverse will be populated more and more by ourselves, and we'll get tons of opportunities to use the metaverse as a simulator for the future. And this opens up lots of questions about how are we going to represent other forms of life. But if we are going to use technology to get a better relationship with other beings, such as in the case of the picture on your left, which is in blue. A sign is a video, but I won't run it. A sign of a whale, which is has a transmitter that is trying to find a way in the middle of big trade ships in the Patagonia. So the whale is trapped because she knows, she is hearing the noise of the ships. But now we know that's happening, and we can send a signal to the ships to shut down for an hour, for 2 hours, to change their path, or to help the whale to move around. So with the use of technology, perhaps we can also create new ecological relationships and ways of assembling new types of ecosystems that will avoid extinction and avoid the crisis of biodiversity. Of course, we don't want to get to the imaginary cat biobot. It's an horror film that also can be the result of getting into animals' bodies. Perhaps you remember this movie, Johnny Mnemonic, where there was a previous Neo from Matrix, which were able to talk with a dolphin, a wired dolphin, that send their ideas to the guy in order to fight against the gangs. It was a conversation that was mediated by technology, and the movie is quite interesting. You can look at it. It's a bit old. The question is, would you like to really connect with your cats or dogs? You really want? Are you ready for what they want? They may say to you. So let's think a bit on which values are we favoring and how are we thinking about them, how they affect our behavior, if there's a coherent way or between our thoughts and our decisions, and then upgrade that to government, to industry, to communities, because I think one of them, and I agree with the World Economic Forum, the most important or the worst that can happen is that we live in a world of lies, telling that we are protecting biodiversity, telling ourselves that we are following the decisions and directions of the CBD or the Convention on Biodiversity, and then doing nothing, which is the case. I think that biodiversity is really, really illy performing because there's lots of blah, 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 and very little done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those very inspiring talk and many thoughtful words. Do we have any questions?
Or comments, more than welcome.
Don't be shy.
Money back.
Well, I don't have to start, but
Well, you start,
Okay.
and then everyone will collect the courage.
Thank you very much. Lots of thought-provoking things here. You have great hopes for humanity, I think, and that we could cope with all these new ideas. Do you think, I mean, it seems to me you put a lot of trust that we really have the capacity in be creative and think about new ways of engaging with species. And surely there is a lot of innovation out there, but there's so much of conservatism as well. So yeah, but I'm glad you're very hopeful. I'm afraid I cannot be as hopeful as you in this being kind of adaptive to what's out there. I mean, I certainly agree that we need to be updated what's really out there, but that's not really where the trend's going right now. That we are.
Yeah. Well, what I think is that, and I had a picture, but I didn't arrive to that place, that we are getting to kind of a new primordial soup in terms of identities and the quality of beings that are participating into the new ecosystems of the future. And that's internet, of course. That's the huge amount of information that is being shared every day among ourselves, the use of this finally, I think that finally we are, after 20, 30 years of having this device with such a capacity, computational capacity, that we are engaging into larger conversations, that we are doing lots of creative work with technology, and arts are taking over these capacities. But of course, porn, or for example, is also inviting and luring everybody into the net. But it's totally natural because sex drove evolution forever. So perhaps in the net, we'll find also a way to escape from the basic meanings or the basic behaviors linked to sex, and jump to a next level of creativity or engagement or relationship. So what I think is that we have set kind of a new platform for changing our behavior, and then we'll need to experiment. And young people, which are native digitals, or have more capacities and they feel at ease with technology, they will learn and unfold lots of new practices. For example, virtual reality. To have an experience with virtual reality still is a bit shaking, it's uncomfortable, but with time we'll see that virtual reality may create a huge new kind of communities, a huge amount of new communities. Some of them will be very, very bad people mingling around, like always has happened, but then many communities will be thoughtful, they will be joining for solutions. So yeah, I have faith, because there's plenty of young people in the world, and we need to really help them to fix what we have undone.
Yeah, I think I might be continuing off what you were talking about before, but a running theme for me in this talk was just how overwhelming everything is. I mean, there's so much happening all at once. We're discovering so much that we don't know at the same time that we're also discovering how interconnected everything is. And I feel like if you're gonna like stop up and actually do something, you kind of have to shut parts of life down, disconnect yourself from things. And I don't know, it might not be that much of a question more than a comment, but it's becoming very difficult to like set limits, set boundaries to where you want to actually focus. And yeah, that was just my thought on things. And I don't really know what I want to know. I guess I'm feeling very overwhelmed in general. But yeah, any thoughts, any answers to that, I guess would be very appreciated.
Being overwhelmed, and I think that's one of the troubles that young people is finding, and they are being diagnosed as with attention deficit, it's called, that you can focus and you need to jump from here to there. But with our psychology, I think we will learn how to deal with that, because the universe is expanding at expanding at a speed, at incredible speed. The indigenous groups from the foothills in the Amazon, they use ayahuasca, they use yahe. And yahe allows you to find yourself in the middle of chaos. The plants will help you to identify your own deep questions, and will help through life. So there are some rites, there are some ways of really overcome this notion of overwhelming opportunities. But also, a decision that we may take is that how far do we want to stay in our individual identities, how comfortable we feel with ourselves in this pack, this body, and how much can we share and become part of larger units of thought, teams, for example, with the basic where you are part of a soccer team or an orchestra, that you really perform in something where the team is more important than yourself, and then perhaps through technology we can also do something like being a cell from time to time, and then being part of an organism from time to time, and solve kind of this dissonance. It's psychologically very complex, but I'm sure that you are all doing that when you get connected into the internet. You have 2 or 3 identities, you have many communities where you are part of, and you can be, for example, I was in a virtual university a few years ago, and they made me in the metaverse, and I gave for a semester classes in virtual reality. And then I finished and say, okay, thank you very much, the last day. And I said goodbye, my avatar said goodbye. And then I disappeared. After some months, I say, a student called me and say, hey, what happened with your avatar? Why? It's just thrown out in a corner of the virtual university. So I have a corpse in the metaverse, which I was not aware of. So perhaps we learn to appear and disappear in many different dimensions, but that's something that it's up to us. And the second part of the lecture, perhaps next year, and another option, is about identity, about how do we sacrifice or create different identities. to participate or engage into new ecosystems, because that's what we are doing, creating new ecosystems or going back to old ones. So that's plenty of discussions about what's an ecosystem, but yeah, but I share your overwhelming, the sensation of being overwhelmed, but a glass of wine may help.
Yeah.
I tried to come back to something that you've mentioned earlier about trying to change the behavior of new generations. But don't you think that applying your values to new generations, you kind of become the part of the problem, where you become one of the many voices that tell us what to do? So we get kind of lost in a sea of false information. So there is always true information, false information. It's hard for us newer generations to check, as you said, what is true information. Do you have other ways to raise awareness?
It's the issue of freedom and responsibility. I guess that once you start hearing messages from everywhere telling you what to do, you have a trouble with authority. If you need to learn how to solve contradictions. Like at home, your parent, your father says something and your mother the opposite. Usually, you just with a couple of rounds you get an answer. But when there's the state, when there's NGOs, when there's the police or authors from very famous influencers telling you what to do, and you have to decide. So you flip a coin, that's an option, or you get at least a toolkit to sit and think, oh, what's happening? So I think that we need to develop those toolkits better, and it's psychological and also an educational duty to really help our kids not to feel overwhelmed by what's happening. And then there's ways to really understand that truth is a bit more flexible than in the past. That you live by your truth because it works, and I don't need to support or challenge or do anything with respect to what you believe. You can just be there. It is quite complicated not to give advice, for example, in our daily lives. So, I mean, when you go, for example, to court, in Colombia, the Constitutional Court has granted rights to the fish. So now it's forbidden to the sports fishing because they cause suffering to fish, or they may cause, but just the suspicious idea, or that's the potential ill that we may bring to the fish resulted enough for the court to ban sports fishing. I think it's the only country in the world that has done that. And say, well, that's a very nice thing to protect the fish rights or the fish lives. But then tons of people, hundreds of people complaining because they make a living with this activity, and they say, well, why is it is unsustainable? Why is it unsuitable? That's a complex discussion. And so the fishers now come and fish and eat the fish, because that's not anymore sports. So the discussion about the value became on a lower level even than before. We tried to save the fish, but then the opposite happened. But the court has the truth. It has set something in a very authoritarian way. And what I am concerned with is the emerging eco-fascist leaders, because environmental troubles are so urgent to be solved, that are lots of leaders saying, I can help. I have the wits, I have the wisdom, I have the capacity. So vote for me and I solve everything. But you have to grant me authority. So green authoritarianism can appear in the next years. And it's an option for many traditional politicians that right now see that there's lots of young people willing to vote for them, and we need to stop the guys that are destroying the sea, and takes what it takes. So freedom is, I think, is one of the big issues related to values. I don't know if I really answered the question.
You think having freedom and having different values is posing to be dangerous to biodiversity? So reducing by authority, reducing the freedom of people should help keep biodiversity staying.
That's a question for you all, I think, but at least the freedom of the persons may affect the collective decision. That's why freedom doesn't run isolated from negotiation. Wouldn't be, because if not, each of us will have a planet for itself. But we don't want that. We want to really share the beauty of this planet. We want to share. So freedom has a correlation with negotiation and with sovereignty that is given to the collective. So that's why we need to learn how to engage with other people. It's the opposite to the libertarian ideas that we are really the queens and kings of the world, each of us.
We have one last question. Yes. One last.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How do you, like you were talking about having different values and the fact that a lot of them arise from just evolution, from nature, from culture. This idea of comfort in and of itself, how do you, or how often do you think that is addressed in raising awareness about biodiversity? A lot of solutions are great, but for many people in their everyday life, they put them out of their comfort zone. How do you think you can kind of overcome, or how can you appeal to a person to even give up a part of their comfort zone? Or do you think that the solutions need to address the comfort of people, or should they completely ignore it for the benefit of everybody?
That's a political question. I think that with what kind of regime will really help us to overcome the crisis. And that's perhaps where universities are so important, that we need to engage everybody in this discussion. Because really, I don't think that anybody has the kind of the silver bullet for that. So again, what I think is an issue of negotiation. And there are some people that will not participate in negotiation, hopefully a minority, but I guess, and I think that currently there's more and more people willing to discuss transitions, to discuss behavioral changes. And if not, climate change will help us to move ahead. Okay, thank you very much. And
We have a small gift as the appreciation, for our appreciation.
do I deserve it?
Yes, you definitely deserve it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
And
much.
also,
Enjoy.
we want to give you an honorary membership of the Gothenburg Global Biodiversity Center
Wow.
for your dedication to biodiversity awareness, peace, and the inclusion of indigenous voices. Thank you so much for everything
Oh,
that
that's
you do.
amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you.